It's cool. You're gonna get a little brief synopsis today. We're really excited to have two amazing speakers today, and Michael Cox and D'Artagnan Scorza, and they've been basically just briefly. D'Artagnan is doing his PhD in education right now. He got his undergrad here at UCLA, and it's just an example of a powerful student leader. He's also our regent, a student regent, and Michael Cox is on the executive committee of the CSSC. He also did his undergrad here, and he was also a big part of E3, starting E3, which is a student environmental organization on campus here. And basically, both of them are kind of directly responsible for me being up here, too. Kind of interesting story. About a year ago, I wasn't really involved in anything other than school, going to school full time, and wanted to do something interesting. So I went to this Empower Change Summit because I heard Bill Clinton was speaking, and there was all these cool workshops, and there was like this E3 workshop, which my friend told me, oh yeah, you should come to this workshop. And I was like, okay, sounds good. And I show up, and then my friend wasn't even there. But it was a really awesome workshop with these two gentlemen, and I got really inspired and motivated. And then I met somebody after that actually turned out to be a co-chair of E3 and then led ESLP last year. So, and then here I am today. So it's kind of strange how things come full circle, but basically I've been inspired to be here. Partially because of these two guys. So I will pass it on to them.
Let me get mic'd up here. I speak really loud, so I hope this doesn't make it too loud. Sometimes I get excited. I'm so excited to be here today. Oh my gosh, this is, Lucino talked about coming full circle, and for me this is like full circle and a half. It was 6 years ago, like right now, that I was one man on a mission on this campus trying to get this class started. And the first year of ESLP, I literally just worked all by myself at UCLA to make it happen, and was working with a great team of student leaders from across the state because the class started at 5 campuses simultaneously. But working with all of them, I didn't have time to really build a team here on this campus and was just cranking. So, 6 years later, this is the 6th year of this class now. They moved it to the fall, which is an amazing accomplishment, and took a lot of work over the summer when everyone's off doing their summer thing. And so I just wanted to give a big round of applause to our organizers, first of all, Lucino and Isis and Michael.
And also to Michael for the work he's done to help make this possible.
Yeah, well, whatever. Just a quick, we wanted to just give a quick background about ourselves, quick introduction, and then we're going to have you introduce yourselves to each other a little bit. We're not going to go through the group or anything, but we got a plan for that. So my name is Michael Cox. I grew up in Southern California, about an hour and a half southeast of here in a town called Hemet. I came to UCLA as a transfer student. And my second year at UCLA, I started this program. I got involved with CSSC on the statewide level. I studied political science and graduated in the winter of 2006. Helped start the UCLA chapter of the California Student Sustainability Coalition, which then kind of rolled into E3, got reframed, rebranded, and I'm still involved in the statewide. ESLP, just to give you some context, though, about UCLA, this was the first point where sustainability started to be talked about on this campus. Now it's more of a, it's a commonplace theme, but this was ground zero 6 years ago. And, no one was talking about this concept. There wasn't any classes about it, and that's why there was the desire on my part and other people to start it. And, but now, I want just to understand, it's come so far, and because of so many people, way beyond myself, I just was kind of a catalyst at the beginning. We had the huge TGIF campaign this last year, getting 76% of the student vote to secure that fund. It's an incredible victory. The ASUCLA is committed to sustainability. The chancellor, on his way out, Chancellor Carnesale that was, on his way out, signed a UCLA Campus Sustainability Charter. Does anyone even know that there's a UCLA Campus Sustainability Charter? Yeah, I mean, a couple people. But this campus in that charter committed itself to integrating sustainability into everything, every aspect of the university. Community relations, research and development, curriculum, and operations. It's had the most ground on operations so far, but that other stuff is starting to come into place as well. So I just want to, I wanted to bring that stuff up, not to pat myself on the back or anything, or the other people that I was working with in those early days, but just to show how much change can happen in a short amount of time and how far things can go. And and as far as UCLA was concerned, that seed, that first seed was this class, and I was just by myself, and so and I was all alone, and it wasn't easy, you know what I mean? I had lots of nights where I went home and I was crying, and like it was just so much work and difficult, but I just want you to, by relating that, I just want to make the point that if there's a vision that you have, if there's a passion that you have, and you're feeling like, maybe I should do it, maybe I shouldn't, 1 foot in, 1 foot out, go for it. And never look back, because you won't regret it. You'll have to, you'll be challenged along the way and learn things, but incredible things can happen if you make them happen. And really, that's the only way that they happen. No one waits around for other people most of the time. So that's just a quick background on me in terms of what I do with CSSC. I also work in the entertainment industry. I manage a teleprompting company, work on shows like Real Time with Bill Maher and award shows, and I helped do the teleprompting for the Democratic Convention in Denver a little bit ago. And then I'm also a kind of a budding social entrepreneur and trying to start companies that can help young people, start companies as well, and to create an economy that meets basic human needs and pushes the change forward that we have, that we need. So that's just a quick couple minutes on myself, and turn it over to this incredible guy.
It's always so hard to follow phenomenal people, right? You don't ever get that nervous
Whatever.
inside of your belly when you have to follow somebody that's just that damn good. So I'm here for a couple of reasons. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background. Then I'm also going to tell you why I'm here. I was born and raised in Los Angeles. How many of you are local to Los Angeles? All right, that's what I'm talking about. I came specifically from Watts, city of Watts, Inglewood. I graduated from Ringside High School in Inglewood. And today, it's interesting because you have in here, you have Ebony and Ivory, right? What you do is you have two people.
Other way around, Art.
Yeah.
Ebony and Ivory.
So you have two people here who are very interested in issues of justice. And to let you know just how interested I am, I'll tell you a little bit about how I got here. So I went to a high school that at some point didn't have teachers or didn't have books. My 9th grade class, I didn't actually have books. I graduated from Morningside High School in Inglewood, made it here to UCLA. And then I bust my behind off to finish school. September 11th happened, and I decided I wanted to do something to help support my country. I was actually on the East Coast at the time, just came back from South Africa, which radically changed my life because I stood in Nelson Mandela's cell. And it was the first time I was able to connect some of the things that I experienced in my childhood and my own educational experience to this idea of struggle around the world, and this idea of movements around the world. I came back and decided I wanted to join the U.S. military. And so I joined the Navy. And was eventually, I was deployed immediately and sent around the world on basically a Southeast Asian tour to help train Southeast Asian navies. And then I was eventually deployed to Iraq. And so I served on ground in Iraq, in Baghdad, helping to manage international communications and manage members of the Navy who were coming in and out of the country. And that taught me a lot. Not only did it teach me about, in many ways, oppression, but it taught me how to link that oppression to much larger, much stronger macro issues. And so after leaving Iraq and learning about why we were there, let's just say I learned that we were not there to be liberators, but we were there for other reasons. And after realizing that, I decided, I need to get out. And so I got out and I returned here to UCLA. And I said, I know what my purpose is now. I know what I'm going to do. I know how I'm going to help change this world. So I came back and I got immediately involved, and very involved, I might add, in helping to fight for the admissions policy changes that you have all heard, the very controversial admissions policy changes. I was kind of dead in the middle of that work, helping to increase African American admissions, helping to increase admissions of underrepresented students of color, of low-income white rural students who are frequently left out of this equation as well. Helping to ensure educational opportunity for everyone, because there's these two arguments we have, that people in the community need to do everything they can to make things happen. And then people within the institution, once someone inside the community who may have experienced what I experienced growing up, and by the way, I've been on the Dean's Honors list here at UCLA, so it had nothing to do with my educational capacity or my capability to learn. But I lacked the resources I needed to make it there. So I was fighting for those types of people, and those types of people now are beginning to make it into the institution, albeit at very low level. Eventually, we made all that change happen, and I said, I need to take this thing a little bit stronger, and decided to apply for the position of student regent. Got appointed. Here I am now, a year and a half later, after having served, traveling all across the country, working on issues of higher education, trying to address issues that impact us, and becoming very involved in some of the work we've been doing together in the sustainability movement, as well as issues of equity and justice. And Mike and I have built an amazing relationship bridging and bringing those two together. And so today what you're going to hear is exactly that. And how you bridge issues of equity and justice to issues that seemingly don't appear to be connected. Right? So sometimes sustainability is not viewed from a lens of equity. And equity is not equality. Right? I'm not necessarily a big fan of equality. And I'll say that to be very clear. Equality means that everyone will be equal. I believe in equity. Equity means that everyone will be whole. That means that whatever it takes for you to get to where you need to get is what you should have access to. So in other words, a child is not going to eat 5 hamburgers, right? But if an older man who is 200-something pounds needs to eat 5 hamburgers to survive, that's what he needs. That's equity. And so I'm not going to give a child 5 hamburgers and give a grown man 1 hamburger, because that's inequitable treatment. And so the idea here is to be balanced, to be sustainable, is to treat people fairly, humanly. So, as we begin our presentation here, we're going to talk about movements. And we need everyone to pay close attention to these ideas. And we're going to preface this by saying that this is a wonderful social activist, Tom Hayden, we're going to talk about him. And Mike is going to actually talk more about this as well. But think about areas, I want you, as a critical theorist, I want you all to think about areas where this, even the words that we talk about, can be critiqued and where things can be improved. There are things in this that we all can agree with, and things in here that you may not agree with. But what the point is, or what our point is today, is to make sure that you walk away with a very clear understanding of what social movements are and your power and your ability to move social change.
Cool. And such a huge part of that, creating movement, creating just traction, it's all based on relationship. It's all based on building trust with each other. And that's one of the big things that we wanted to kind of embody in this class today. So, we just introduced ourselves a little bit, but we're going to invite all of you right now to, turn to a neighbor, hopefully someone who's not your best friend or even you don't know very well right now, and just take 2 minutes to just introduce yourself to them, tell them what you're passionate about, and why you're here today in this class. So, please. Talk about following greatness, man.
Please. People look at me like I was crazy when I said that equality.
Right.
Okay. We have done this at just about every presentation we go to. There is so much value in you getting to know the person next to you that we refuse to not do it. So the funny thing is that we were actually spending some time up here talking about equity as well, and about the idea of us being made whole. And so what we want you to do is to take a second and report back on the neighbor. Report back on yourself, report back on your neighbor. What you're going to talk about is why you're here. Why are you here in this class? And why are they here? What are you passionate about? What are they passionate about? Because the idea is that you've just learned something new about the person next to you. So I'm going to ask for a few volunteers. The brave souls. All right, right here. What's your name?
Andrew.
Andrew.
I was talking to Blaze, and he was telling me that he's interested in biz econ and somehow incorporating concepts in this class to possibly start a business.
That's amazing. Blaze? All right. Hey, look, when you have a name like that, you know, you're starting the field. Okay? Please.
I'm Ben Goldsmith. I was speaking with Evan, and Evan's passionate about taking the environmental aspect of movement and growth with the social equity conversation and kind of bringing them together to support both as one, so it could lead to new possibilities. So that's Evan right over there.
Right.
He's talking about.
Yeah, who's also our, what are you, Evan?
Internal Vice President.
Thank you.
All right.
USAC representative, your internal vice president.
Cool.
So if anything messed up, go talk to him. Don't come talk to me. No, you can go talk to him. So, but you know what? You two didn't tell me why you're here, though. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm kind of interested in leading like a healthier lifestyle, so I was kind of interested in this class. But to be perfectly honest, like I had to get classes at the last minute. Like class pretty bad, so the two correlated. Wasn't.
Look, that's always a good reason.
Hey, honesty is virtue.
I'm here. I'm an artist. I act. I make music. I do a lot of art, and I'm also interested in the environment and helping the environment out. And then Blaze over here was showing me that he signed up for the class. He showed me the description of it. I was like, I'm interested. I'd love to hear about all the things I don't know about, learn more. So that's fine.
That's an example of a social movement in action. Someone else? Thank you.
This right here is my new friend Yohi. And
Yogi.
Yohi.
Yohi. And what does that mean?
The full name is Johanna.
Yohana.
Yeah, which we thought gives grace.
Wow.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, if a name can start a movement, then this guy's on it. And he's really passionate about returning home to Ethiopia and creating sustainable development there. And he's all about loving people.
Oh, wow. It is amazing. And you, Maddie?
I'm Maddie, and I'm here because I've been elbow deep in all this goodness for years now, and I'm not quitting anytime soon.
All right. Wow. So it's important for us to understand people's motivations and their desires to be here, because that helps us figure out kind of the individual reasons people have for being a part of the movement, right? It helps us to understand how you can be connected to the person next to you, even though you may have never known them, and how you feel connected to someone. How there's this kind of magnetic field, this energy that's out there, which we're going to talk about later, that allows us to make change happen. So some of the objectives of today, and as we move forward, it's important for you all to be taking notes. Right. By the way, I teach in the mornings, Monday through Thursday. I'm a PhD student in education, so I look at urban school and reform. And I teach students. And every single student, every single morning, I tell my students, take out your pen and your paper. And so, please don't feel offended. It's just habitual, okay? Take out your pen and paper. And so we're going to talk about a few things today. One of the reasons that we wanted to do this feedback is so that you can learn how to build relationships. We also wanted you to learn about each other's passions. If it's as simple as taking your class because it's something you need, or you're here because you're elbow deep, or you're here because you want to go back and start a sustainable living development in another country, an underserved country. These are all good and perfectly legitimate reasons to be here. We also want you to learn how to dialogue, a dialect, this ability to exchange information and to create something anew from that dialect. And Michael came up with a wonderful word here. We want you to be
agitated. Do you like being agitated? I don't like being agitated, but we want all of us, including us, to be agitated when we leave here today. And what we mean by that is not irritated. If you're irritated as well as agitated, that's cool. But we want you to leave having things on your mind, unresolved questions, and we hope that we will as well.
Yeah. And the idea is to have you engage in kind of this social transformation or this own personal transformative action, right? We want you to walk away questioning, asking, out of your comfort zone, because your comfort zone is a safe space to be. But when you're creating change, sometimes you got to push beyond that safe space. So, as we move forward, we're going to talk about this M model.
Cool. Just to get a barometer on the room, how many people are in the hard sciences? Okay. How many people are in specializing in the social sciences? All right. How about like political science specifically? History? Okay. Sociology? All right. Well, I wanted to do that because what we're going to present today is it's heavily in the social sciences. It's kind of it's a model for understanding how social change happens, how it works, and it relates to kind of a theory of history. How many people actually got a chance to do the reading? I didn't expect you to, but wow, that's not bad. Better than I hoped for. That's great. Great. To get started, anybody know who Tom Hayden is? Who's Tom Hayden?
He's a famous anti-war activist from the 60s.
Mm-hmm. Yep. No, Jane Fonda. But anyway, Tom helped start an organization called SDS, Students for Democratic Society, back in the 60s. Anyone heard of SDS? There's a new one going on now. How many people are involved in the new one? Cool, cool. And he was the principal author of the Port Huron Statement, which was a real definitive kind of a manifesto type document of SDS. Later on, he became a California politician, state assemblyman, turned out, became a state senator, turned out, ran for governor against Pete Wilson, and didn't win, but he's still involved, and he's a prolific author, written many books, and he's a professor now over at Occidental College in political science. And he's become a friend and somewhat of a mentor of mine. I've gotten to sit down and have some good discussions with him, brought him to ESLP to speak that first year when I organized it, and to a couple conferences that I've helped put together. And he dropped this reading on me one day that this PowerPoint's associated with called Movements Against Machiavellians, the M model for understanding social change, and provided a really awesome framework for me. So we're going to get into that. How many people know who Machiavelli was? Okay, so for those who don't, he was a Italian. I'm not sure which century, but in I think pre-Renaissance. And he was an advisor to the wealthiest and most powerful family in Italy of the time. And he wrote a seminal work called The Prince. And The Prince is one of the defining documents of political science and political theory. And it is followed tooth and nail, so to speak, by a lot of the people who are the most powerful people in the world. And it's about basically the thrust of The Prince is telling the de' Medici family, who was the wealthiest family in Italy, how to maintain their power, sustain their power, and increase their power. And it was kind of a guidebook for that. So a Machiavellian, in this sense, is, we'll get into the definition in a minute, but that's what that's referring to for those who don't have that background. Can we hit to the next slide? Cool. So the introduction. This is, so real quick, this is Tom's perspective. I don't agree with it full-heartedly. Dart doesn't necessarily. This was where he was at a couple years ago, so it could have changed a lot. So feel free to disagree. That's good. That's the basis of a democratic government and a democratic society. But try to take it for what it's worth and just engage it for what it is. So the introduction, anybody want to read this? Come on. Johannes.
All social change results from the clash between social movements and rebellions. What is meaningful in our lives from those values we live by, the wages we make, or the air our children breathe, is the outcome of this permanent conflict.
So he's putting forth a big theory here, right? A really big one. He's saying that, you know, everything good in our lives and in society has been fought for, right? And it has been won. It has not been given. It has not been given because we have inalienable rights. It is the product of this clash between the power structure, the Machiavellians, and the social movement side of things. So let's go to the next slide. So we're going to do a couple definitions. Go back one. So a movement. A social movement is a massive community of protest that begins outside and seeks to change the dominant institutional order and its values. Here's the definition. Movements are moral responses to moral injuries, which are abuses to human dignity. Movements always involve material grievances as well, but movements are more than interest groups. In the course of social movements, there will be divisions between moderates and militants. Movements are moral responses to moral injuries, which are abuses to human dignity. I'm going to ask you to engage your partner again, and you know, pick a movement, any movement, the women's movement, the civil rights movement, the human rights movement, sustainability movement, whatever you're comfortable with, and identify, talk about what the moral injury is that is being responded to in that movement. Just, you know, take 1-2 minutes with your partner, brainstorm a little bit. Want to make sure that this isn't just us talking at you the whole time. So, all right. So, anybody want to just comment on what they brainstormed about? Talk about what the moral injury for the particular movement you chose. Just a couple examples. Y'all are very smart. You're at UCLA here. Right here.
In the 1960s, the anti-Vietnam War social movement, people were responding to the fact that there was an unequal sharing of the war effort. People in areas were actually going off to war and sent there, whereas people could, others in more privileged areas could simply go to college and escape going to war. So.
Right. Thank you. What was your name?
Sean.
Cool, thanks, Sean. Anybody else want to chime in? Hi. Up here. What's your name?
Tracy.
Hi, Tracy.
Hi. The environmental justice movement is responding to the fact that certain communities are bearing the brunt of environmental burdens, specifically communities of lower income or communities of color. So they're bearing the burden of environmental justice.
Definitely. Very good. How about one more? Yep, what's your name?
Missy.
Hi, Missy.
Also, Silent Spring, the book that Carson started the environmental movement, and she talked about the chemicals, how they're killing off the birds and other different species, and how people are getting cancer off that too. So I guess that's considered a moral injury.
Great, absolutely. So that's a moral injury not just to humans, which is very important, a moral injury to life on Earth as well, right? That's an important foundation. So that's the movement side, right? Now to define the Machiavellian side. Machiavellian. The Machiavellians are the elite and power technicians of the institutional order, whose purpose is to maintain their incumbency over culture, the economy, the military, the state, and orderly processes of change. The Machiavellians are the elites and power technicians of the institutional order, whose purpose is to maintain their incumbency over culture, the economy, the military, the state, and orderly processes of change. In other words, their purpose is to run shit and continue to run shit as long as possible, right? And to maintain their power by any means necessary. Moderate Machiavellians, so we had a split in the movement side, right? There's also a split in this model on the Machiavellian side. Moderate Machiavellians are more willing to accommodate to preserve their larger interests, while militant Machiavellians favor trying to destroy or hold out against the movement permanently. So let's put a face or faces to this a little bit. Anybody have an example of a Machiavellian? Bush, right? Would you consider Bush to be a moderate Machiavellian or a militant Machiavellian? Militant? You think moderate?
Why?
Huh?
Why is he moderate?
Yeah, why is he moderate Machiavellian?
Well, because, I mean, as an elected official, he has to keep his popularity with the constituency. So, I mean, he's going to work the people and try to compromise. For example, the bailout bill, I mean, he's a Republican, which is the ideology is small government, no intervention. But he kind of acquiesced.
Nationalize the financial system?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. In order to do something that people wanted.
So if he's a moderate, who's a militant? Is the Democratic Party a Machiavellian institution in your perspective? Yeah? Okay, cool.
What would Obama do?
Ooh. Yeah, you think he's a Machiavellian? I think.
What would McCain do?
How about outside of politics? Who's a Machiavellian outside of politics? Business, culture, media? Monsanto, absolutely. And the CEOs and board of directors running it. Anybody else want to chime in?
American Medical Association.
Ah, interesting.
Oh, like Judd Apatow?
Who? You got to educate me, I'm sorry.
He's the producer, writer of all the basic big comedies that have been coming out with Seth Rogen. And
Okay.
that whole team, he's like the head. Yeah.
So he's trying to maintain his incumbency over culture, right? Rupert Murdoch would be another good example as well on the economy and culture side. So that's the Machiavellian side. The next piece is movements. This is how they arise, right? And we'll have a couple of points on this. I'm going to move a little bit quicker through this. They have been ignored, oppressed, or persecuted culturally, racially, politically, or economically. Social change never begins with the mainstream. Rather, that is where it ends in this model. Next one, miracle. They emerge as if by miracle. They are unnoticed by journalists and experts until the movement has already begun. They are inspired in ways they have not experienced before. And then there's this question, or this quote from Father John Sobrino. We must also leave room for the little stones, apparently lifeless, a nuisance, useless in the Christian faith. The logic of the little stones is essential to the struggle against the empire. So these little stones that are unnoticed, right? They start to gain momentum, start to bring themselves together. The next point is magnetism, and we'll unpack this one a little bit. Beyond any organization, social movements exist as a magnetic field of energy. So when you hear that, what does that mean to you? Does that make sense? You got to unpack that a little bit. Critical mass? So it's important to understand with this that the center of a movement is not a leader, right? It's a moral response that comes from moral injustice. A leader puts themselves out in front of the movement, right? They might be leading it. In some ways, a lot of people think Obama is positioning himself as kind of the forefront of this movement for social equity in the world right now. Yeah.
Also, couldn't you say it's also magnetic just because of the attractiveness of being a part of a movement? Because I'm sure there's a whole slew of people that don't necessarily feel the things that some people may feel, but want to do it because it may look cool or be the thing or be the now, or they want to be part of that social change. So
Right.
I think it's also important to recognize that it's not just the sole believers, it's also people that are doing it for other.
Yeah. This class is an example of that. When the first year we did it, 70 people were in it. Now I think it's like 125 enrolled, and it's continued to go. I think it's over 2,000 students in the UC have now received credit as part of ESLP, which is cool. So, movements, the center. If you think of it, think of like a solar system or a galaxy. What's at the center of a solar system? It's the sun. What's at the center of a galaxy? It's a black hole, right? Especially with the galaxy metaphor, I think it really works well because it's just this black hole, right? There's no matter there, yet you have billions and billions of stars, billions and billions of solar systems circulating around it, right? And so the center of a movement is not a leader necessarily. It's that response. And so when you think of like the sustainability movement, for example, you know, it's a distributed leadership. You know, a lot of people think Al Gore is the leader. A lot of people would think, you know, Van Jones is a leader. Well, they're both right? And there's a hell of a lot more leaders that are out there. Let's go to the next point. So movements create communities of meaning. They create these communities of meaning to sustain themselves. What does that mean to you? Create a community of meaning to sustain themselves. Put the inverse of it. Without creating a community of meaning, they would not be sustained. Think about it in that context. So you need to, I mean, it kind of relates to what we did at the beginning of this class about, you know, building relationships, getting to know people, creating community. Because you ever heard that quote, you know, no man or woman is an island, you know? Without that community, it's really hard to accomplish things and to move things forward, especially when you're talking about addressing moral grievances on a statewide level, an institutional level, a national level, a global level. No one's going to do that by themselves. Yeah, please.
Meaning making, this idea of meaning making, right? Making meaning to apply and understand into your context. Figuring out the why. Why are we doing what we're doing? In very many ways in understanding of self, right? In order to understand why something has occurred, you really have to understand yourself in relation to it. And so movements help you understand more about yourself and more about your own behavior, and more about why other people do what they do. And so this is the process of meaning making. And this meaning making is sustained through this magnetism. And as this magnetism grows, it creates a history, because you have corporate memory. And so this meaning making comes from this repetition of history and this reinforcement of history. One of the very first things you heard us say when you walked in here is that this thing has been going on for 6 years. That gives you all meaning, allowing you to sit here through this lecture and even the boring parts. Okay?
Which we know there are. Cool. So march to the mainstream. So jumping forward. You know, seeking to survive and prevail, movements gradually persuade the mainstream public of their moral demands. That doesn't necessarily mean they mobilize the mainstream public, but they at least get an implicit support from the mainstream. This march is either literal or figurative, but the movement wins increased, there should be a support there. Increased support from allies, fairer media coverage, and backing from the strata of the less committed, right? A lot of people who you know, recycle, but aren't necessarily going to try to create a recycling program, right? To put it in environmental terms. Go to the next one, Dart. So the divisions between, I lost my place here. Oh, here we go. As movements enter the mainstream, divisions occur between militants, those who want either to change or protect the status quo, and moderates, those who are committed to modification of the status quo order. This is a very important point, and this is something that if you're one of the less committed, you would never know about, you wouldn't care about, you just, you know, because you're watching from a distance. You're listening to it over the radio or watching over the television. But this is talking about, like, within it itself, what's actually happening. And it's saying that, you know, there's these people, the militants and the moderates, don't necessarily see eye to eye, don't necessarily get along. With Tom Hayden, there was a split with SDS. And there was a group that he was with that tried to, you know, work with Kennedy and then Johnson and go on the reformist route. And then there was the Weatherman Underground who decided, hey, we should start blowing stuff up. Right? Obama's catching a lot of heat right now because he's associated with a member of the former Weatherman Underground. And now Palin's going around all over the country saying that he pals around with terrorists, right? So the way that memory is created and the way that we'll get into in a minute. But it's very important to know that there are these divisions within the different sides of the kind of power structure itself. All right. Politics. Movements gaining mainstream support inevitably enter the world of political parties and politicians. They have to. Why? Because the politician's goal is to stay in power, right? And if the movement's starting to get mainstream support, and people are starting to put pressure on the politicians saying, hey, are you listening to this? Then they either have to, you know, go against it, I completely don't agree, or they have to be like, oh yeah, that sounds like a good idea. We should talk. We should figure something out. We should come together, right? But if, you know, if the moral injustice that people are trying to right is large enough, it's inevitable that it's going to go into the political realm. Media. I'll read it from up there. Movements give birth to their own media for purposes of community and communication. As they enter the mainstream, movements are manipulated by the corporate mass media and are forced to respond. We're seeing this now more than ever. You know, YouTube, you know, even text messaging is a form of media. And then you look at more mainstream programs. You know, you got you know, radio stations that are kind of mouthpieces of the so-called movement. You know, shows like Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman, things like that are examples. And then, you know, the corporate mass media on the other side, the grossest example probably being like Fox News or something like that. So skipping way ahead, remember this is, he's trying to, and we'll have some, this is all words, but we'll show some graphic models in a minute too. This is happening over time, right? So ultimately, movements will triumph because they go beyond individuals and organizations and even generations, right? If the moral injustice is not righted, then more and more people, more and more organizations over time will form until finally people feel that they have their human dignity back. They have their dignity back. So eventually the movement wins, majority support for its core demands, both forces and persuades the Machiavellians to concede new norms, policies, and laws. At the same time, the more radical implications of the core demands are contained. Because what you have going on there is the militants, once negotiations begin here, the militants on both sides break usually with their counterparts, right? And they think over here that they're sellouts. And over here, they think that they're sellouts. And over here in the middle, they're trying to create an agreement that they think will work. But with that happening, there are certain things that the Machiavellians who are willing to negotiate can't give into. And there are certain things that the moderates on the movement side can't give into. And you know, what you have is something watered down in the middle that will, you know, bring that kind of, I forget the term that he used. It was the less engaged, or, you know, the people who are kind of watching from a distance, providing implicit support for the movement. It'll make them go, okay, good, something's been done. The Voting Rights Act had passed. The Civil Rights Act had passed. Everyone's equal. You know, America's a great place again. Meanwhile, the core demands haven't really been met necessarily, or the more radical demands. And it's important, Dart and I were talking about this when we were getting prepared for today. You know, yes, it is inevitable that in terms of this model, that a movement will eventually triumph because it transcends generation, institution, and individual in the moment. But that doesn't mean that movements don't lose from time to time. They lose more than not, you know? To even get to the point where you're having negotiations here is extremely difficult, requires an incredible amount of organization and community building and, you know, resource generation and those kinds of things. So that's important to understand. But once the movement so-called triumphs, it's really important to know, and this is the key thing that people especially in the progressive world and in the progressive movement, don't really understand, and what I think is the genius of this model, is that they're only thinking about themselves, for the most part. They're thinking about what's wrong, what they want righted, and all that. But over here, it's just a monolith to them. It's just the bad guys, you know? And what they don't necessarily realize is that when reform is achieved, the Machiavellians triumph as well, because it secures their position in power, right? Because now people are you know, calm again. They're complacent. So while some Machiavellians set in motion a counter movement against the reforms, militants, the Machiavellians overall, especially the moderates, take command of managing and implementing the reform, right? And within that, supporters of the victorious social movements become demobilized, and some of the leaders become part of the institutional system, either in elected or appointed office, as symbols of the movement's triumph and as inside watchdogs ensuring the implementation of that effort.
So we have a little sidebar on this. Okay? When I was here at UCLA, fighting my behind off for increasing admissions of underrepresented students, or students of color and from white rural students, changing the admissions process to a more fair process than one that the Ivy Leagues use for a highly selective institution, I eventually became the student regent. One of my motivations for becoming a student regent was to do this very thing, to become an inside watchdog, to ensure that these triumphs were accomplished, right? And it's important, I think, to understand our roles, understanding ourselves in relation to these roles. Now, I wouldn't necessarily call myself an inside watchdog. I have a constitutional responsibility to the UC and to you. But the idea is that people inside of the movement eventually become a part of the system. Now, my question to you would be, did I now become a Machiavellian?
Ooh, it gets personal.
I know, it does, doesn't it? Really, because we have other people like you who are part of the sustainability movement who go and get hired in a university. Let's say you go to become a doctor, you go get a job, and you get hired in a university, and you're fighting for sustainability from within the university. Or you now run an ESLP class within the university. What do we now become? So I challenge us, remember, see, some of this is, I hope this is agitating some of you. I challenge us to really think about some of this stuff and think about the implications. By the way, which doesn't mean any of this is bad, because I can sit at the board and challenge both moderates and militants, right? I can sit at the board and I can have a voice and a vote in a way that many other people do not. And so there are a number of benefits and challenges associated, but it's important, I think, for us to really think about this particular point.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So the role of memory, this is critical. If you think about most of the debates in, I don't know how many are political junkies, but I'm a political junkie. And if you think of most of the debates that are kind of defining the splits in America today, people are still fighting over the 60s. They're still fighting over the memory of the 60s and the early 70s. And that leads to this, the role of memory. Movements begin and end on the fields of memory, museums, and memorials. Movements claim and seek to preserve a heritage for future generations. Moderate Machiavellians seek through historical co-optation to minimize any memory of radical social movements. Militant Machiavellians promote suppression or amnesia in place of movement memory. So let's make it real here at UCLA. 2 Black Panthers in the early 70s were killed in Campbell Hall. How many people knew that? Right. And you probably wouldn't know that if there wasn't a fight for that memory right now to rename Campbell Hall after those 2 guys, right? And if you think that UCLA is just going to like turn over and rename it Bunchy Carter and John Huggins Hall, you got another thing coming, because that would be such a how do you say, a concession or even an affirmation of the Panthers and the work that they were doing by the institution to rename it, that, you know what they told the organizers when they said, we want to rename it? They said, cool, go find us $25 million. Go find us $25 million and we'll consider renaming the hall, Meanwhile, these guys died in there, right? Shot and killed, trying to organize a movement. And so, all this stuff is all around us. This isn't just theory. It's right here in this room, too. When you think of war memorials, how they're constructed, what they look like, they're all, you think of 9/11 and the huge competition over the rebuilding of the World Trade Center. And they're talking about calling it Liberty Towers. That's a great example of, this kind of fighting over memory. Keep going. So this is just looking at the kind of timeline. This would be good for notes for those who haven't got bored with us and checked out yet. So when you look at the movement timeline down here, it begins on the margins. You have this march to the mainstream. Ultimately, it may take many different tries, but ultimately you're going to have a reform the majority achieved, and the movement wins. Gradually, the movement is really absorbed into the mainstream again, and there's a gradual demobilization. And then there's the legacy, how that memory is preserved or not preserved or completely erased, right? Then when you look at the Machiavellian timeline corresponding to it, you have a hegemonic order moving to, as that march of the movement is happening to the mainstream, you have repression or accommodations. What does that look like? Well, civil rights movement saw a lot of repression in this country, right? The famous images of the fire hoses and the dogs sicked on the protesters in Birmingham, the beating up of the students at the lunch counters, that was repression, right? As the movement was marching to the mainstream. Ultimately, you have a reform, right? So that's the Civil Rights Act, that's the Voting Rights Act, and then the counter-movement weakens the reform. We've been seeing that over especially since Reagan came into office. There's been a systematic effort to roll back every single gain made from a social level in the 60s and 70s, and pretty effectively. And then ultimately, there's a co-optation, or a fight for the memory. And when you think of that, some examples that come to mind, the Republicans like to talk about how they're the party of Lincoln. Lincoln was a Republican. Although if Lincoln were here today looking at the Republican Party, I find it hard to believe that he would agree with everything that they're going on and that he would identify themselves with it. When you think of the battle over Martin Luther King, this is a great example. For the history books, Martin Luther King ends at the I Have a Dream speech. You don't hear anything out after that. But he was alive for years after that speech. And the reason why official history ends there is because that's when he was at the height of being an organizer around racism. Although he changed his view. He changed his perspective, and he realized that it was more of a class struggle. And then he started to organize, he wanted to organize a poor people's movement. And he did that for years, and when he started to gain traction, guess what? Boom, bullets. That's when he got taken out. And yet we don't hear about the sanitation workers' strikes. We don't hear about those other 3 years of this man's life after the I Have a Dream speech. It just ends. Same thing happens with Malcolm X. Malcolm X is remembered as a demagogue, as someone who completely hates white people, spitting fire, But Malcolm X changed his name. He left the Nation of Islam that gave him that X. He discounted everything that they were standing for. He said publicly, I was brainwashed by Elijah Muhammad. I have now accepted the Islam that over 1 billion people in the world practice. I have taken the Hajj. My new name is El Hajj Malik El Shabazz. I've disassociated from the Nation of Islam. I'm starting the Organization of African American Unity. I'm starting the Muslim Mosque Incorporated that are sanctioned by Africa, that is sanctioned by the Islamic world. No one ever hears about that Malcolm X. You never hear about him. Yet he's there. He was this close to getting both major African leaders and Middle Eastern leaders to take the United States. And he's like, and the Joker's so happy and crazy. And he's like, we're the perfect combination, the unstoppable force and the immovable object, right? And when you think about this, the movement is kind of like the unstoppable force, and the Machiavellians are like the immovable object. So you got that big red line there, and that's the immovable object that the Machiavellians are trying to do. Go to the next one. So this is what reform looks like. The movement breaks through, right? They get the concessions. There's an institutional opening. There's an empowerment. There's a benefit that most people agree with. The radicals on both sides of the Machiavellians and the movements aren't happy, and they're going to keep fighting the way that they do. But most people are cool and feel like things have gotten better. Go to the next one. Movements don't always win, and movements often create a backlash. So this is the Reagan Revolution, coming back after the 60s, and embodied now in Sarah Palin, big time. So there's this backlash, there's this co-optation, there's this containing memory, there's this, Martin Luther King was a Republican, he stopped at I Have a Dream. There's all this kind of stuff. And then movements don't always even get reform. A lot of other things happen sometimes. Sometimes, go to the next one, when they don't get the reform and they keep fighting, sometimes you have a revolution. And don't get me wrong, I'm on YouTube, never advocate revolution. No, 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 no. Not in this country. I mean, even if I thought it was a good idea, even if I espouse violence, which I don't, who's got the guns? You know, if you ever think you're going to outshoot the U.S. government, you know, you might as save yourself a lot of time. No, I'm a Gandhiist completely. I'm about nonviolence and peaceful transformation of things. But revolutions happen. They've happened in this country, right? The British would not let reform happen. So we had a revolution, right? The French Machiavellians wouldn't let reform happen. So there was a revolution. You look at, you know, the czars in Russia created the communist revolution. So revolutions do happen, and that's when this order is completely overthrown and the leaders of the movement become the Machiavellians, and they start it all over again. You look at Joseph Stalin, right? He was a product of a revolution, yet he became one of the, you know, most intense Machiavellians of the 20th century. Mao Zedong, what led the People's Revolution in China, and then once he had power, you know, changed things and was responsible for the deaths of like 10 to 15 million Chinese people. So, you know, you got to be careful with this stuff. Oh, go back one sec. I wanted to see those bullet points. Yeah, so the system has changed, values are changed, and the power has changed, and who it is embodied in has changed too. So this is another way to view it, and we're almost done with this section, and then we're going to open it up for a lot more discussion. Go to the next one. So this is looking at the kind of cycle. You know, this is if everything works out, that's kind of the reform. We'll go through these quick. Sometimes it doesn't win. The Machiavellians rupture it. Sometimes the movement ruptures the Machiavellians, and you know, that's pretty much the presentation. But what's important to understand with this, when you put this in a historical perspective, is that movements don't exist outside of time and space, and they don't exist without each other. So if you look at a longer historical timeline, you know, what you're going to see is not just one cycle. Blackboards. So, you know, say this is history, right? Right? And, you know, from the beginning of history, people have been oppressing each other. And people have been assaulting each other's dignity, taking away their dignity. And so movements arise. And over time, you know, they build off each other, right? Until you get to, and the point of saying that is that I don't think there would be the movements that we have today without the ones before them, right? Because, you know, a certain reform is made, and then there's other injustices that come about in that new institutional order, and then there's a need for a new movement, and it spirals forward. So that's you know, the end of our academic presentation. And we wanted to open it up and talk about how social equity, environmental justice, sustainability, all these different concepts, how they relate to kind of this model of social change and of history making that we laid out. So I'll turn it over to you.
Well, wasn't this such a wonderful presentation? Michael's the man. I don't just say that about him. I don't say that about a lot of people. I say it about him. I say it about him because today you all got a really good lesson. And I know, you know, I'm a student too. I know this stuff gets really tedious sometimes to sit there and listen to, but we really appreciate you all checking in and staying in with us. One of the reasons why it's important to know this history of movements is because each of you have to know where you're situated at with regards to the movement we are currently in. We are facing, this country is facing a major, I mean, we're in the middle of a major movement right now. I mean, the idea now, after 40 some odd years after the Civil Rights Movement, that an African American can be the head of a political party and run legitimately to be the next president of the United States after 400 years of slavery is an amazing concept. That didn't just happen overnight, right? The idea that sustainability, this equitable distribution and effective use of resources has become such an important concept now after the raping of continents for hundreds of years, right? The overuse of oil, the increase in global warming, the melting in the polar ice cap, the idea that communities should be clean and not have smog, or should not have a landfill next to an elementary school. You know, I went to 96th Street School in Watts, and there's a huge power plant, DWP, right next door to it, these huge transformers and these huge, what are those giant silver things? What are they called? Giant towers, electric towers, right?
Uh-huh.
Right next door to my school. Can you imagine all the cancer that maybe some of us might end up with? Right, and so these are some of the concepts that are going to connect this idea of equity and justice. And it's important for us to all know where we're situated at with regards to this, but we don't want to spend this time, the rest of this time, just continuously lecturing. We are going to get into some more theoretical aspects of what it is that we're talking about today. But at this time, I actually want to open it up for questions and for discussion. And there's some general discussion questions that we have that we're going to go for. But we want you to answer this question for yourself. And so I'm going to pose this first one to you. How does the sustainability movement connect with the equity and social justice movement? All right.
The environmental sustainability promotes cleaner air and clean water, and therefore that promotes for more people to have access to clean air and clean water. Because many people, especially in the developing countries are taking advantage of them, and especially in Amazon, you know, we're cutting down all the trees, and in there we're taking up all their land, and we tell them for the industrial countries, saying, oh, we're going to build all these schools, and they just cut all their trees and take their resources, and therefore they're put down into poverty, and they're worse off than they were before.
So you're saying by changing our behavior,
Yes.
we can have a positive impact on those who are not only in developing countries, but those who are underprivileged and underserved.
And in developed countries also.
And in developing countries.
Yes.
Right. So that's a really good way of linking these two movements, right? Is that we, as social actors, increase our level of responsibility to our fellow people. What are some other ways?
I wasn't going to get into the ways so much as like the root causes of both. I mean, they share the same root problem. They manifest themselves in different ways. One, the way we treat people, and secondly, the way we like treat resources and distribute resources. But they're actually like two manifestations of it, the same idea and problems occurring at the root.
Which is?
Which is going into, I think, a lot of culture and also something that's rooted into religions. I took a philosophy class at Glendale, taught by Professor Gupta. There's a lot of literature out there trying to tie in the idea that, you know, major religions, and these are things that have happened historically, where, you know, like kind of tying in the idea of like anti-feminism as well as like raping of the earth, and how that we can sometimes find justifications for these actions in the twisting of some religious doctrines, you know. A lot of it is just serving one's ego versus like looking at a holistic view of like what's good for all.
So that's an interesting perspective, because it says that there's individual responsibility. And that the way we, at least what I'm hearing, please correct me if I'm wrong, the way we apply our own levels of individual responsibility and the things we use to justify that can create different problems, either socially, ecologically, economically, or any one of those roles, right? You know, I talked to a couple of my colleagues on the board. One of them, who happens to be the chair, Regent Blum, Dick Blum, who is actually the husband of Senator Feinstein, comes in, and the day before WAMU fails, he says, you know, I think WAMU is going to go under. This is the day before it's in the news. And so I thought to myself, well, thank God I only have $9 in that account. This man knows. He's in private equity.
Yeah.
And then I asked him, why do you think that is? I asked a couple of reasons, why do you think that is? And you know what they said? Greed. They said people got greedy. So they took advantage of a system and got greedy. Just some of the fundamental challenges, I think, associated with what you're saying, to me, at least I hear, is human nature. Now, I happen to believe, because I was a study religion major, I happen to believe that religions are actually ways to help check the ego. And I do think there are things that we do to help encourage the ego by manipulating religious doctrines and religious texts. But aside from that, I also believe that it's important for us to recognize these connections when it comes to movements. You ever something like that?
Yeah, I wanted to address one thing real quick, and then maybe we can just open it up fully for Q&A. I know class ends at 4:50, right? And I know Dart's got to leave a little bit earlier than that. So, you know, I wanted to make one other point, and then you can make any other final comments that you wanted to, and then we'll open it up. And you can ask us anything about this or anything about anything else. God knows there's enough going on in the world today to talk about, to have an interesting conversation. And I think it'd be kind of a travesty if we didn't, you know, see what's in this space right now. The point that I wanted to make is going back to this definition about movements. Movements are moral responses to moral injuries, which are abuses to human dignity. So each movement is a response to an injustice, right? And I wanted to make a connection here. How many people think environmentalism and sustainability are the same thing? Anybody? Okay. What's the difference? Maddie.
Environmentalism is a movement that's purely focused on ecology and preserving it for the sake of human enjoyment, really. And sustainability is focused on preserving nature for the sake of nature and preserving really all systems for the sake of equity among human beings and species.
Well said. There's a reason why this sustainability frame has come about, and it's because there was an insufficiency with environmentalism. Environmentalism was not addressing social justice and equity, right, at all. And it was not only not addressing it, but it was exacerbating it, right? And that's why you had the environmental justice movement come up. You know where the environmental movement started? It didn't just start with, it started with Silent Spring, but there was a few others. You know what one of the other ones was? Big oil spill on the California coast right outside of Santa Barbara, right? Shocked the nation. And man, those Santa Barbara surfers got pissed. And what's the demographic of Santa Barbara surfers? You know, it's mostly, you know, upper middle class, mostly white, and you're like, dude, we can't take this anymore, you know? And, you know, that was one of the things that launched the environmental movement. But they weren't, if you're living in Santa Barbara, you're not that conscious even of the, you know, largely Hispanic population that's living on the east side of town. And, you know, it's an easy place to be in a bubble. And the environmental movement, in general, has been in a huge bubble. And not only has it not, you know, affirmed that people have been oppressed and continue to be oppressed, but it was actually became complicit in it. It said, anyone ever heard this thing, NIMBY, not in my backyard, right? That was the war cry for the environmental movement. But it was the war cry for, you know, Beverly Hills, you know? No, don't put that, you know, trash, you know, that landfill here. Don't put that smokestack here. Let's move it to Watts, right? And then environmental justice came about. And what was the injustice there? So I think it was, the lady up there said it great earlier. It was that there was a disproportionate impact of the environmental harm that we were causing, and it was placed on the communities who had the least ability to mobilize and defend themselves. And that was poor communities and communities of color. And then this movement erupts. Well, these people don't get along. Believe me, they do not get along. And the environmental people don't understand environmental justice folks. And the environmental justice folks are like, hello? What do we have to do? Do we have to take you to our neighborhoods in Detroit and show you the trash incinerator? Okay, get in the bus, you know? And thus, we needed something that moved beyond that and that integrated these interests. And that's why sustainability has come about. And the response to sustainability is kind of like this beautiful, like, catch-all, benign term that you can just, anything that's wrong in the world, you can just, that's not sustainable, you know? You just throw it in there. And it's like, its brilliance is how benign it is, because it's like, well, of course I think life should continue in perpetuity and that my children's life should be better than mine. Because if you don't agree with that, you're a monster, you know? Who can say that, you know? Yes, I want to completely be as greedy as possible and live this world, live this life completely for my own aggrandizement, and I'll just shove all of this crap onto my kids and my grandkids and all of yours. Awesome, And that's been the world that we've been living in mostly. So sustainability, and that's why we came up with this brand of E3. And it integrates ecology, economy, and equity. Ecological integrity, economic abundance, and social equity. And when you view, and when you're looking for solutions, you're looking for solutions that make sure that all those interests are protected. And it can happen because, like what Dart said earlier about being whole, sustainability is all about being whole. And it's about making sure everyone's needs are taken care of. Not just rich people, not just people, but life, right? So.
And this is where the idea of equity and the equity movement now comes into play. Because you have a strong foundation for how we got to this battle over resources. Most wars are fought over resources. In fact, almost every war has been fought over resources. And so when you get to the place where we begin talking about equity, we talk about how those resources, once they've been mined and distributed in a fair and balanced way, how they're now placed among different populations. Who has access to resources? Who has access to this classroom, learning this material, right? So now we begin talking about the who. And the why is it that certain people do not have access to this classroom and these materials. And this is where equity becomes merged with this idea of sustainability. Because in anything, we're all sitting here, we all have privilege. There's not a single one of us who cannot say we are not privileged at some point. But there are people right now around this world, as you all know, who do not. Who do not eat, who do not sleep, who do not have access to clean water. And so can they go out and fight for these wonderful concepts of sustainability? It's going to probably be pretty darn difficult, especially if you can't eat, right? Because that's your first thought is, I need to figure out how I'm going to eat. And so that's where the equity piece becomes extremely important in this concept of sustainability. Now, as Mike said, we are going to open this up for general discussion as well, and we wanted to ask you a couple questions to prompt that discussion. But you can ask us anything, right? You can ask us about challenges in the UC, you can ask us about challenges in the world, you can ask us about what we think Obama's policy should be on environmentalism and why McCain decided to pick up that same tone, right? You can ask us about all these things. So, shoot away.
Right. Please introduce yourself too.
Hi.
Hi.
You guys are talking about obviously the steps that social movements go through, and it seems kind of obvious that at least in the general terms, the sustainability movement is coming to the mainstream, or is beginning to come to the mainstream. We're seeing how widespread it is in political discussion and even in commercials now by Enron and things like that. And so I was wondering what, in your opinion, the sort of dangerous modifications that are going to happen very soon are. What we should be looking for.
Sure. Well, when applying this model and looking at it, think about what are the goals of the Machiavellians, right? It's to sustain their control of the system. It's okay if the system changes a little bit, if we have a different energy source coming in, but we got to control it. So what you're seeing is solutions of highly centralized, highly big solar installations being put out in the desert by SoCal Edison or by PG&E or whoever, rather than putting solar panels on schools, on houses, and creating more of a decentralized system, right? So you're gonna see solutions that favor the centralization of power and the centralization of resources, which is antithetical to the underlying vision and values of sustainability, because it's saying that what we need is a diversity of resources, a diversity of power, and lots of solutions in the ecosystem that creates resiliency and sustainability over time. So when you look at Proposition, I think it's like 7 or 10, one of these ones, T. Boone Pickens, the big former oil magnate and natural gas magnate, is pushing this and acting like he's all about sustainability. Well, what he's really about is controlling the renewable energy infrastructure that gets built and making sure that it doesn't get swept out from under him and all of his friends' hands. And so, the California voters are hearing, yeah, we need wind energy, we need da-da-da-da-da, we need natural gas. And what they don't see is that who's going to control all those things, So I think it's about the centralization of resources and power in those solutions.
Just using that as a jump board, I think you see the same like with, I think it's for the U.S., I think the world does Shell or BP is the largest supplier.
Mm-hmm.
It's ironic because we kind of stick on these oil companies. They're like, oh yeah, make oil companies polluting, but they're spending the money, and I think, it's wherever the money goes, that's where they want the power to go.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's a good point. Yeah, Sam, go ahead.
I'm taking a class on global economics right now, and one thing we're talking about is the weaponization of the globe and how capitalism is kind of spread, and I don't know, it's just kind of going all over.
Good time to be in that class.
Question whether capitalism and sustainability are workable. Do you think that we can change that?
Well, we got a couple more minutes here. What I think is the basic problem with capitalism, to me, is just the blatant greed that it can produce and can generate. What I believe in is market economics. I don't necessarily believe in capitalism so much. And if you look at, like, if Adam Smith could come in here and talk today and saw what was going on with the capitalist system, be like, this isn't what I was talking about. You guys are going crazy with corporations. I never said corporations are people and should have the same rights as people.
By the way, they argued using the 14th Amendment to make that happen. So they argued using civil rights legislation and the Emancipation Proclamation to ensure that corporations have the rights as people.
So market economics has unleashed more human creativity, more human potential than, I would argue, any other big development in human history. So I don't think we should do away with the market by any means. Humans will always have a market. Before there was capitalism, people were trading goods and services and creating currency and those kinds of things. What I think we need to do is change the fundamental values of capitalism that it's operating on right now. I'm actually involved in a media project that's talking about these kinds of things. You look at like microfinance and socially responsible investing and these different things, and there's this whole emergent trend of what they call social capital, social capitalism. And investors still make money, they still get a return. It may not be as high as they would if they were just completely focused on profit, but we need to move from a bottom line that is purely the highest amount of profit in the shortest amount of time. That's what the entire structure is built around right now. The economic system, the legal structure, even the political structure is built around generating the highest amount of profit in the shortest amount of time. And it is actually against the law, if you're a corporation and you make a decision that is not in the best interest of the profit interests of the shareholders in a quarter, right? So 3 months, we have to make our decisions on how we're going to make the most money in the 3 months, So we have to move from a bottom line of just pure profit in the shortest amount of time to a bottom line of E3, right? One that is about economic abundance. It's about creating real economy. It's about meeting basic human needs and creating jobs and all these things. But it's also making sure that everyone has a fair opportunity and an equitable opportunity to realize their potential in that system, and that we're making sure that we're taking care of the earth. Because if we cut out the ecological foundation, there will be no system. We've built this capitalist system right now on quicksand because we've taken finite resources of the earth and acted like they were infinite and they would never run out. And that there'd be, the earth can just absorb as much pollution as possible. And it's just not the case. It's a closed system, We don't have 10 planets to extract resources from. We have one. So we're either going to figure out how to work with it and how to, lift all boats. And I think what we really got to look at is the values that are driving the system.
Do you think that's going to be like an international role, as far as governing that, or do you think that pop culture is going to kind of bring that up within the general population?
Right. I don't have a lot of faith in the Machiavellians to regulate themselves and to do the right thing on behalf of everybody. I have faith in the Machiavellians once they realize how shaky of ground they're standing on to do what's necessary to maintain their own power. And that might be to incorporate a lot of these things. And that's kind of the bet that I'm making. I'm trying to talk to them, hey guys, it's all about to come down on you. You know, you really want to lose that car and your house and everything? Like, you really want to forfeit, you know, the future of your kids? And trying to, you know, we need to bridge these divides, and we need to get people on the same page. But I have the most faith in people, you guys, and the communities that you create to create solutions to these challenges that we're dealing with right now. You know, if you look at Google, right? No one knew about these two computer science kids from Stanford, you know, 10 years ago. Now they're some of the richest people in the world, and they've created solutions to things that we didn't even know we needed solutions for, you know? So my faith is in putting in structures in place that can help, you know, cultivate that latent human potential and mobilize it real fast. One other comment on this. 50% plus of the human population is under 30 years old. 50%, right? It's on our back, and especially our back because we can actually do something in that, right? If you're in that 18 to 30 range, you actually have the ability to go out there and make things happen. If you're 5 years old, we can't ask you for a whole lot right now, you know? But we need to make sure that we're, you know, working in your best interest. And those numbers get even more skewed in countries that we have the biggest problems with. 40% of the Saudi Arabian population is under 14, right? And you combine that not only with all, on a national security level, 18 out of the 19 terrorists who were involved in 9/11 were from Saudi Arabia, right? And now 40% of that country's population is 14 or under, right? So we need to figure out how we're going to mobilize our generation and the younger people to unleash the latent potential that's in all of us. Because I'll tell you what, if the Machiavellians just try to plug us in to the system as it is now, get your job, go make money, it's not going to work. It can't. It can't. So we need to really figure out, I think we can, you know, convince at least the reformist side of the Machiavellians to put structures in place and put financing behind unleashing that kind of bottom-up wave of solutions and ultimately of healing. That's what we're talking about, is healing.
Good job with that.
You mentioned T-Boone Pickens and his self-interest being behind his plan there. And his kind of Machiavellian figure and his role as Machiavellian. My question is his self-interest as a Machiavellian, is that grounds for our non-support of his plan? I mean, given the kind of calamity, the magnitude of the climate crisis we face and what the IPCC calls for our immediate huge-scale action, is the fact that his self-interest is behind his plan, is that grounds for us to say, no, we don't want this, when it has the potential to have so much benefit?
Not in and of itself, I don't think. But you have to look at what solutions will not be created because we put all this energy and capital into it, what potential will not be unleashed because of it. And they're not easy solutions, you know. If we go the T-Boone Pickens route, there's going to be a huge focus on natural gas. You know, they'll build as many wind farms as they can where it really makes sense. But what you're going to see a lot of is clean coal and natural gas. And what you're not going to see a lot of is investment in small-scale solutions. And to me, no one knows how this climate crisis and all these other things, mass species extinction, the ridiculous gap between rich and poor, no one knows how these things are going to play out. You know, nobody knows. It's anybody's game. One of my favorite sayings is, all bets are off in the 21st century. You know, all bets are off. You know, and so I think you can't disregard his self-interest in putting these things forward, and you have to ask, okay, yeah, he might gain a lot of it, but is he trying to do what he believes is best for the whole or not? And even if he is, even if you respect that, will it work? You know? And what are you not doing because of that? You know? I think what we need is small-scale solutions developed and applied at the community level, and we need to be working bottom up. I like top-down action, but I think what it mostly needs to be about is not controlling everything, not dictating how it's all going to work anymore, but putting structures in place to unleash the potential of people. There's a big debate right now. You heard it in the presidential debate. Should we create a Manhattan Project for alternative energy? Should we create 10 Manhattan projects for alternative energy? Or should we, empower 1 million scientists who are working in their garages to just go after it, And that's a fundamental debate. It's a fundamental debate. Thomas Friedman, who's become one of the most outspoken proponents of action on climate change, the writer for the New York Times, used to think we should do a Manhattan Project, or 10 of them. He doesn't anymore. He thinks that we need to empower that latent potential now, because he believes that's where the really big ideas are going to come from. So it's complex stuff. It's not, I'm trying to move people into the gray of the world and not see things in black and white.
We have time for about one more question, quick question, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up.
I have a question. We just said, from the bottom up, will that be just as fast as from the top down, or would that be a slower process, or will that be enough time to be able to fix all these issues?
Who knows, It's like my grandma used to tell me that, like, when you're climbing a mountain, you don't look at the peak, You just look at that next step you have or that next hold, So I think, and, Gandhi has this great quote that the path is the destination, So for me, it's like, there's a lot of darkness out there. We better, like, light that candle and just start walking and see where we can get, Because nobody knows. It's huge. I believe in human potential. I believe that we can make it work. And I believe in our generation, especially, and its ability to unleash its potential to solve these things. I think that's why we're born in this time, personally. But that's my belief.
It's going to be our generation that solves this. Or we might be working for things that we may have never seen in our lifetime.
Right.
And it's important to understand that. But every single person that's involved in this movement is going to create change. I'm going to just point you all to some ideas, some concepts that we get a chance to get into today, theoretically, that you might want to learn how to answer some of these very large questions. Think about this idea of capitalism versus democracy. Whereas capitalism is this accumulation of wealth, and democracy is this accumulation of power in the hands of the people. And how those two play out. How the people, the owners of wealth, is about 1% to 2% of society, the majority of the wealth of the country. And then the owners of power happen to be simultaneously the owners of wealth. And so it's important, I think, to understand that and understand how we participate in democracy if we're going to see this type of change. Look at social structure, look at class levels, look at the gaps between the rich and the poor, look at the shrinking, quote-unquote, middle class, look at the demographics of the upper class, the ultra wealthy. You can go to the Forbes 500 list and look at the first 18 people, and it'll give you very clearly who our most rich people are in the world and what their demographic is. And then also look at the majority of people who are considered, quote-unquote, lower income or lower class, and look at the mixed demographics in there. And this will also help you understand some of these links. Then finally, I want you to look at this concept called meritocracy. Meritocracy. This idea that you can work hard and achieve and move up in life, that you can work hard and become something. Because you worked hard, because you participated, you can eventually get here. Well, there's only so much room at the top. And so hopefully this will start answering part of your question there, Blaze, about how capitalism is going to play out versus sustainability. Okay? Start thinking about the opportunities that you have to move here and how limited that opportunity would be over your lifetime. Not everybody can be 1 or 2% of the wealth owners in this country. And so how are you going to create those solutions now in your life and situation today? And so I hope you all enjoyed the presentation. We love the discussion. So thank you all very much. Give yourselves a round of applause.
Cool.
Cool, so I hope you guys learned a lot today, and I think since this is a really good opportunity for you to write your response paper on, since you just wrote all of the stuff and having a good conversation. Next week, we're having the film screening.
Thank you. You too.
You know, we have our film series every other week on Tuesdays. We had 35 people come out last week, had a great movie and dessert, and we're going to quickly show you the trailer for next week's film. Maybe you guys can help you guys come out. Do you guys have any questions about the reflection papers? Because hopefully you'll...
What are you looking for?
Yeah, la.eslp.net.
We're on the film series. We're trying to
I'll pull it from the internet.
And do you guys, in the past, they sometimes give responses back. Do you guys want responses back, or do you...
Real quick.
Not really fair. If you do want responses in the I'd like a little response. We'd be happy to give you some feedback. la.eslp@gmail.com. It's where we sent you the email from that address. Any other questions about that?
Like a page.
Yeah, just a page. It's in the course requirements and all of those 5 options. You can do any one of them. Or if you have a great idea on your own, we're really flexible. You can come talk to us too.
I just wanted to say one thing that really stuck with me about the presentation today. You know, I know a lot of information was just thrown at you guys, but if you're going to leave with anything today, one thing that I'm taking with me is this idea of this movement that we're all part of, whether we want to believe it or not. There's this magnetism that kept us together. You know, this magnetism that is, this moral issue that we're trying to solve that brings us all together. It's not any one of us that's making this movement happen. It's this magnetism. And so if you can just remember the triple bottom line is the direction that we want to move forward to. You know, we were talking about a lot of what businesses do, and businesses optimize for the single bottom line right now. But the future of this world is optimizing for that triple bottom line, what E3 is all about: equity, economy, and ecology. So I hope you guys take that with you. That's all I have to say.
I definitely agree on that. That was awesome. I feel that too, and also I kind of felt like it brought back full circle to what Michael was saying in the beginning about relationships, and that it's kind of, I mean, that's kind of what it's based on, is like relationships, and then we have that interaction, and I think that's where that latent human potential is that we were saying. Is that the term you used?
Yeah.
I think that's where that comes from, and I think that's a really important part of that social equity piece. And also invite you guys too, because I know like I have so many thoughts and like trying to discuss. There's not another class in here, so when this is over, if you guys want to stay in here and discuss amongst yourselves, I know Michael still.
I can stick around for a little bit. He has to run to a class, but I'll be here for a minute.
But yeah, if you guys want to, have a more like discussion after this is over, because we're about to finish in like 4 minutes.
Cool.
Also, somebody looks at a water bottle here in our first class. It's like this greenish water bottle. Anybody? No? Okay.
It still has water in it.
I just want to say that you guys are here. There's so much potential in this room, and if you think about all the people you individually know, this person you're sitting 2 rows behind you might be the last link to your key before you can get your social movement working. Or maybe you want to, introduce yourself to Michael Cox about D'Artagnan, and just talk to them and see what they can do for you too.